Is it time? Is it time for Pierre Poilievre to make an appearance on Joe Rogan? Xing He over on X asked this question. He says, now that Pierre Poilievre's back in Parliament regaining momentum in the polls, do you think it's time for him to go on Joe Rogan? The episode would easily break the internet with 100 million views plus, and I've heard from many people telling me that they want to see this interaction. Now that's interesting. And now I have to ask you, because I've asked people in my personal life. Some people said yes, some people said no. Some people think it would be a great idea to have a 3-hour conversation with a guy like Joe Rogan who has the reach that he has. And some people think it won't matter because the only people who will listen to it are people who already vote for him anyway. Now, Sharon Moore actually brings up this question. The people whose minds need to be changed don't listen to Joe Rogan. I don't have a problem with him doing that. I just don't see him reaching the right audience. Well, that's the interesting part of this. Will it work or won't it work? Because if it works, I think we're all in agreement that he should do it. But if it backfires, we'll regret it. And that's why I think people are kind of going back and forth on this, right? My opinion on this, and again, let me know in the comments what you think, because I'm really, really curious to see what you guys have to say. My opinion on this is that a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan, where Pierre gets to show his humility, get a fair interview from one of the most popular podcasters, or the most popular podcaster ever. Joe will ask him some questions that maybe get a little bit uncomfortable for Pierre, like, hey, what happened during the election? How'd you lose your own seat? Things like that. And Pierre gets to have a chance to show his humility, show his charisma, show his personality, and appease to the younger voter. Now, people will say, Dan, younger voters don't vote. But younger voters, or potential young voters, I should say, are going to be, if you're 16, 17, you're a very short time away from paying taxes and looking at what rent might look like for you. You're going to be looking for work. They're going to find out in short term that there's not a lot of work, rent is insane, and taxes are high. And if you want that to change, well, politicians are going to make policies to change that. Do you want to not vote and let others decide for you? Because let me tell you something. The demographic that votes the most are in two areas: females and boomers. Not all of you boomers, I want to make this clear. It's not all boomers, it's not all females, but those are the ones who do vote liberal the most, especially here out east. So the highest demographics of voters are female, mostly liberal, and boomers, mostly liberal. And there's way more of them. There's a reason they call them boomers, right? There was a baby boom, and there's a lot of them. And they're massively outvoting us. And they're voting the other side. Now, do you want them to get their way, or do you want Pierre Poilievre to go on Joe Rogan and potentially reach these younger viewers, younger potential voters, and gain their votes? That way, instead of having, 32% of the eligible population who could vote and did not, maybe it goes down to 25. And that extra 7%, maybe Pierre gets 80% of it. It's 70% of it, 60%. But as long as he wins a majority of those new voters, younger voters, who will see him in an honest conversation, in an honest interview, will that help Pierre Poilievre potentially take down the liberals? Because if boomers are going to outvote us, and they're going to vote liberal, especially the female ones, again, not all of you, then it's going to be very hard for us to take down the liberals, especially with the NDP kind of flailing around like a fish out of water. Now, there's also the Patrick Bet David podcast. There's Full Send. There's Sean Ryan. There's a bunch of podcasts he could do to try to reach younger voters. But I do think that Sharon, who wrote the comment saying, hey, I don't think the reach is going to matter because he's not going to reach anyone that's going to make a difference. Well, that could be true. Or it could backfire somehow and these younger voters decide Pierre's not the guy. I don't see that happening, though. I see that if Pierre goes on this podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, and explains to these young voters, Canadians, why he's the man for the job, I do think swing voters could go back especially the worse Carney does over time. And I can see young voters saying, hey, politics do matter. And I've been told by my older brothers or my older uncles and aunts and my parents that it didn't matter that much when they were younger, but then as they got older, they started paying attention. Well, what's the point in waiting, especially considering we need a job market that's not existent? We need to have lower taxes and we need affordable rent. Those are things that are going to affect them right away as they enter adulthood. So waiting until you're older may not be in the appetite for these younger folks. They may want to jump into politics quicker. And they're going to want to listen to Pierre Poilievre speak, but they're probably not going to want to watch, some boring media scrum all the time. They might want to get into this by seeing him show his charisma, show his personality, show his humane side on an entertaining podcast. And maybe it's not 3 hours, maybe it's an hour and a half, maybe it's 2, whatever it is. An honest conversation with people like Joe Rogan, Full Send, Sean Ryan, Patrick Bet-David, maybe. I don't know if Patrick Bet-David would even still have him on. I mean, maybe his buddy Maxime Bernier just turned him off of Pierre. I don't know. And by the way, to be fair, Maxime Bernier did go on Patrick Bet-David's podcast and lost 75% of his vote share. Now, he's also a very stupid, humiliating, weak politician, so maybe that's also why. It's hard to say. But I don't see anything close to that happening to Pierre if he's going on these podcasts having honest conversations. Being asked uncomfortable questions as well. And to be fair to Patrick Bet-David, he would do that. And I think Pierre would handle himself very, very well. It's a very interesting conversation to have. Now, that being said, what we're also seeing is, I've seen, Pierre Poilievre with Ryan from Northern Perspective at the Calgary Stampede. Right? So he's done a little interview with Ryan, which is great, by the way. Go check that out. And the reason I say little is because I think it was like a half hour. But either way, it's a good interview. He's done an interview with Jasmine Lane. And now today, the Elevate podcast has also come out and said that they have an interview with Pierre dropping on Thursday. So he is starting to make the rounds on podcasts. It's just, does it help him to go on Joe Rogan? It's an American podcast. However, he does have a good following of young Canadians. Same with Patrick, same with Sean Ryan, and especially Full Send because Kyle from the Nelk Boys is from Toronto. And they reached out to Pierre during the last campaign or just before, and they were shut down, and so was Rogan. I think Patrick Bet-David was too. And there's been some criticisms for that. But it's also easy to be a quarterback on Monday morning. It's easy to say, well, we should have done this the day after. You never really know going into an election campaign, especially with this type of an election, which was very unique. And you also have to consider the fact that a lot of Canadians are very fickle voters. They will swing back and forth. It's not like we swing way more than the Americans do. And the Americans have a more of a liberal conservative split. We don't really have that here. We're way more liberal than we are conservative. So for a conservative government, especially one who had to go through the Trump crisis, the trade deal crisis, whatever you want to call it, Trudeau being replaced, and the NDP completely collapsing, for Pierre Poilievre to still get 41% and gain seats is very impressive. But then you could look at it as, well, he lost his own seat. That was embarrassing. That's behind him now. He won a new seat. He'll be back in the House of Commons September 15th. But it was a very, very strange election. If the NDP comes back a little bit, if they double their vote totals from 6 to 12 or get up to 15, 20 like they usually do, most of that support's going to come from the Liberals. So maybe he doesn't need to go on these podcasts. Maybe he just needs to wait a little bit and see what happens with the NDP. That being said, I still think it's a good idea to reach more young voters. Get them early. The Liberals have been trying to do that, and they've succeeded for years. They even wanted to lower the voting age to 16, which I believe they did during the Liberal leadership race, which is insane. But they want to do it federally. Why? Because they know they can pull at the heartstrings of young people. As they get older, generally they get smarter. They get more fiscally responsible. They pay attention to finances more than feelings, facts over feelings, etc. We've all heard the phrase. But my question is, and I want all of you to answer, if you don't mind, should Pierre Poilievre go on the Joe Rogan podcast amongst other podcasts? Should he stick to just Canadian podcasts? Or should he just continue doing what he's doing, ramping up the issues with immigration, crime, housing, etc., etc., etc.? Because what happened in this election isn't going to happen in the next election. They don't have another Hail Mary to throw, the Liberals. They're not going to replace markcarney with anyone. The reason they chose markcarney in the first place was because when they did a poll amongst Liberal voters, hey, who's most popular out of this person, this person, this person, the category of other won. Right? They would rather other than Karina Gould, Chrystia Freeland, Dominic LeBlanc, Stephen Guilbeault, etc., etc., etc. No one in that party was popular. So when Justin Trudeau's popularity faded, they panicked. And they threw in markcarney, and he was popular. And still is pretty popular. They don't have that anymore. They've used their Hail Mary. Hail Marys only work sometimes. The Trump threat will likely be either gone or not as important. Especially if we get a trade deal that's fair. Or if we get one that's bad, that's going to hurt Carney. The elbows up meaning literally won't mean anything to the elbozos. And then you'll have the NDP coming back, you'd think, after they get a new leader in March. So maybe Pierre just says, hey, that was a weird election. We can learn, we can go harder after some issues, but maybe we just stick to Canadian podcasts. Who knows? We don't know. But I really want to hear your opinion. So please let me know. And again, please, if you haven't already, smash that like and subscribe button. Share the video. It really helps me grow the channel, and I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back shortly with a new one.